Welcome into the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast presented by SeatGeek, a podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad.
Crosses over on Herb, drives into the lane, baseline, jumper blocked by Jones! He's got it! Not on Herb, baby! Not on Herb! Herb!
The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Welcome to the Pelicans Podcast presented by SeatGeek. I am Joe Cardosi, joined by the relentless Jim Eichenhofer, because we won't stop. People keep saying, hey, are these player podcasts going to keep coming out? We won't stop because Jim keeps grinding. And today we're going to have Mr. Todd Graffagnini, radio play-by-play voice for our New Orleans Pelicans, talking about Mr. Herbert K. Jones.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to speaking with Graff about Herb. He seems to be a big supporter, but then again,
Big Herb fan.
I feel like everyone is a pretty big supporter
How
of
can you
Herb
not
these days.
be? Yeah.
I mean, I think the guy's awesome. I think it's not just the stuff that he does on the floor and the contributions he makes defensively, improved his shooting, especially in the latter part of the regular season. Just his demeanor. I mean, from day one, I feel like
Herb vibes,
people
man.
love the guy. Last season was incredible to see him go from, at the very beginning of the season, his rookie year, you weren't sure necessarily how much of a role he was going to have. And then by like the second or third game, he was in the starting lineup. And it sounded like Willy Green by the second or third game was like, yeah, we need to have him on the floor as much as possible. And he was coming off the bench in Summer League. And then it didn't take him long for people to just be like, man, this guy is really valuable.
Yeah, he is undeniable. And it's just great to see him getting some recognition around the league. You know, it wasn't that long ago that people were saying, who the hell is Herb Jones? And now you got guys like Paul George saying out loud that Herb Jones should be Defensive Player of the Year. No matter what happens, whether he wins it or not, or whether he gets named all defense, the fact that he's getting that sort of recognition this early just sort of shows his ascension.
And I think another thing to Herb's credit, beyond the fact that he's very beloved among fans, and I think not even just fans of the Pelicans, I think people across the league like watching him play, respect his game, and want to see him do well.
Yeah.
But the fact that the players seem to be his biggest advocates, the guys that go up against him on a nightly basis that have to try to figure out a way to get baskets against him and get open, players like you said, like Paul George, it seems like constantly the players are the ones that are talking on podcasts about how Herb Jones deserves recognition for the stuff that he does. I think the coaches also are in that category from teams across the league. They understand, you know, how much of an impact that he makes on the defensive end, but definitely the players are constantly saying, you know, this guy, and I think maybe to part of your point too, in terms of the way he carries himself, I think the players respect the heck out of that as well. The fact that he's not a guy that is trying to get attention and he's not on social media all the time. He's not talking about how great I am, or if anything, he goes the other way. He doesn't want attention. He just wants to play basketball.
We're not trying to name names, Dylan Brooks. We're not trying to call out anybody, Draymond Green. But isn't it nice to have a defensive player who actually like plays strong defense and isn't trying to be a WWE villain?
Yes.
It's just great to see Herb Jones walk in his sweats, ready to play ball.
And I think sometimes people wonder if some of the guys that defense is their biggest strength, if they feel like they don't get enough attention, so they kind of go overboard with seeking it. And so it's kind of refreshing to see Herb just be like, yeah, whether you want to give me credit or not, whether you want to talk about me or not, it doesn't really matter. I'm just here to do my job, help the team win, shut some people down, get some people tweeting not on Herb, not that he cares. And just go home and maybe go fishing during the offseason.
Go fishing. I was about to say, him and Jonas love to go fishing. Just a low-key guy. You just love to see those guys who are so easy to root for, like a Herb, like a Trey Murphy, you know, ascending within the organization. Herb, of course, one of our favorites. And our next guest, Mr. Todd Graffagnini, of course, if you have listened to the radio call, you know that he loves him some Herb Jones. So we want to leave the man all the time we can so that he can sing his praises, because we got a lot to say about him. And we are especially excited, as Jim said, about his offensive output towards the end, which we will talk about with our guest, Mr. Todd Graffagnini. Joining us on the Pelicans Podcast. Been too long since we got to talk to the man. I've missed him since the season ended, and I know you have. Mr. Todd Graffagnini, our radio play-by-play voice. How you doing, man?
I'm okay. Joe and Jim, it's great to be here. A little bittersweet that we're talking because obviously the playoffs are going on right now. And when you go back to last year and where we were at this time, we were about to play a Game 5 in Phoenix, and the just atmosphere surrounding the entire franchise was just at an all-time high. I mean, well, not an all-time high, but pretty close.
Yeah.
And, now here we are a year later, and you're just watching everybody on TV. So it's good to talk to you. Other than that, it's great to talk to you guys.
Say, people have been like, hey, been paying attention to the playoff? I'm like, it's taking me a while.
Yeah.
Because it took me a while to want to watch basketball again.
I've watched some of it, full disclosure, but the Minnesota-Denver series, I can't bring myself to do it. I just can't.
Yeah,
I just
was
can't.
Tough. We were talking a little smack about Draymond Green earlier, which was fun and easy to do. But we were, also talking about how great it is to have our own defensive presence. That isn't just a constant, not someone trying to be a WWE villain. We have Herb Jones, who is low key, easy to root for, and plays the game the right way.
No doubt about it. It's just been such a pleasure to be around Herb the last couple of years and just to see how he goes about his business on a daily basis because, Jim, you've been doing this a very long time. It's a cliche, but in Herb's case, it's true. First to get to the gym and last to leave. I don't know if there's ever been a time when I've walked into the facility and Herb Jones wasn't already in there getting shots up. Mm-hmm. He truly puts the work in. We already know what he can do defensively, and he's really been that type of a defensive player coming out of college, but they knew this in Nashville. Remember when the team went to Nashville after Hurricane Ida hit, and they knew that Herb was going to be someone that they were not going to keep on the bench. He was going to have to play right away. Mm-hmm. So just to see how his game has evolved and, just looking at the numbers, he's been pretty consistent numbers-wise. I think what hurt him this year was the fact that he had a lot of nagging injuries earlier in the year.
For sure.
And never really got into the type of rhythm that we saw him get into at the end of the season where he had his legs under him and what have you. He just never was consistently in games the first part of the season.
Yeah, it's funny when you mentioned the part about the first one in the gym. I think of how CJ McCollum at one point this season basically said that he has to tell Herb sometimes, like, hey, man, you need to do something else besides being in the gym all the time. So sometimes you need to change your mindset a little bit and, get away from it. But Herb is not interested in that whatsoever. No. And I do think that the amount of work that he put in, which is something that Herb talked about all season when people said to Herb, like, hey, you've been a little inconsistent with your shot. What are you doing about it? And he would constantly say, the only thing I know is to just keep getting in the gym and spend hours and hours in there and just keep working on it. Like, I'm not getting the results that I was hoping for maybe in, November, December, January, but look what happened in March and April. So I think Herb's response to, hey, maybe, you're spending too much time in the gym is he's going to just double down and say, hey, I kept working at it, and look the way it ended up in the end of the season.
No, the three-point percentage really skyrocketed. I mean, he was around 50% for a while, from post-March 1st, which is basically all-star break on. So his three-point shooting became very consistent. We saw him, get to the rim, slash to the rim, which is, I think, a very big part of his game, and that added to what Brandon Ingram was doing, distributing the basketball. So the field goal percentage was up. The free throw percentage was where he needed to be. Now, that dipped a little bit from last year where he was an 84% free throw shooter. I mean, that was really something that goes underrated for her because he really converts when he gets to the line. I mean, if he's 75% or more, that's pretty solid for what he's been doing because he gets to the line enough. But it really culminated in that Memphis Grizzlies game when he scored 35 points, which was a career high. And to see Herb get over the 30-point mark was awesome to see when you throw that on top of everything else that he does on the basketball court, which is basically Willie Green saying, okay, see, that's their best guy. Go stop him.
Yeah.
And that is the responsibility that Herb basically has on a night in and night out basis.
I mean, how huge do you think it is that seeing that offensive jump in Herb? Obviously, we've known from the beginning what a defensive presence he is and how disruptive he is. And to your point, he has to go guard the other team's best man. But it was almost a detriment sometimes having him on the floor because there was just no offense in place. But now, if you're going to sag off a Herb and you're leaving him open, and those 3-point shots start going in, it makes everyone more.
Well, no, and you're right, Joe. And the key was to all of that, even though when he was struggling shooting the ball up until really March, he never stopped shooting. I mean, his confidence was always there because, as we hear all the time, Coach Green saying, you got to trust the work.
Yeah.
And Herb puts in the work. So you got to keep shooting. And eventually it paid off. And we saw what he did the last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, he had a stretch. You referenced this earlier. He had a stretch from 3-point range where he was 13 for 18 over about a 6 or 7 game span. He made 15 out of 16 free throws at one stretch. Actually, I think it was 17 for 18. He finished the regular season being almost like a 90% free throw shooter. So, like you said, he dealt with injuries, and I think that affected his overall numbers. He got
it was
really
just
hot.
nagging stuff, too.
Yeah.
It wasn't,
We talked about that with Jonas, who, again, another one of your favorite players.
Yep.
We were talking about how Jonas never really went out, and he never had a big injury that was worrisome on the report. But he dealt with little nagging stuff.
Yeah,
all
and
season
again, he
long.
played 78 games last year. Did Herb? I mean, that was as reliable as you could possibly have him. What he was doing night in and night out defensively, you got to have it. I mean, he has become a somebody who night in and night out is going to give you the type of effort that he does, and it's just huge for this team.
I was just glad to see him close the season the way that he did. I mean, he had some stretches. You mentioned how he kept his confidence throughout, but he had a stretch where he was, it's tough when the ball doesn't come to you all the time, and he had a couple stretches where he was shooting air balls from 3, and he was just off. But for him to kind of turn that around and finish the way he did was big, especially going into this offseason. I think we're just going to keep expecting him to get better and better on the offensive end. But, I mean, he provides so many other things that it's not essential that he turns into some elite offensive player. I think if he continues to do what he did in March and April, that will be more than enough for the Pelicans.
New stats nowadays, these stocks, Jim, the steals and the blocks.
Yes.
Yeah. He got over 100 steals this year. He didn't have as many block shots this year. As a matter of fact,
How many blocked threes?
I did mention this, and just talking to John DeShazer and Jim, I don't know who keeps this stat, but he's got to be top 2 or 3 in blocking 3-point shots this season. He's got to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I could think 7, 8, 9 off the top of my head, and that does not happen. It just really doesn't.
Yeah, his total blocks were down, like you said,
Right.
but his per minute blocks, he went from 0.9 as a rookie per 36 to 0.8. So it really wasn't that much of a
Again,
difference.
consistent.
Yeah, it was just his minutes were down this year
Right.
because he played 12 fewer games, and his minutes average was slightly less. So all of his counting numbers, it's not really a fair comparison to his rookie year, but I mean, he still did, like you said, he had. You don't want to shoot a 3 in his face because a lot of times he's going to send it back in your face.
Yeah, and you talked about the minutes too, but at the end, he was playing 38, 39 minutes. In that Memphis game that went to overtime, he played 44 minutes. So Willie Green knew at the end of ball games, and when you had to have him, he was out there.
What do you think he offers in terms of versatility now? Because you saw Herb playing sort of that our death lineup, playing at the 5. Obviously, Larry Nance is going to take some of those minutes going forward when you need to, sub out, play some small ball without JV. But how important do you think that's going to be? Just the versatility he offers in terms of where you can rotate him on the floor.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, if the 3-point shooting continues, I mean, he's your 3-and-D guy. I mean, but Herb's more of a corner 3 guy, Jim.
Yeah.
You don't really picture him sitting on the wing
Right, or
and jacking threes up.
Yeah.
Because when he's on the corner, also he can slash and he can get to the rim. So I like where he is in the corners because that's going to give him a little more opportunity to score and space the floor, obviously, for all the other guys. But the consistency of the 3-point shot if that remains the same as we saw at the end of this year, then I don't see why he wouldn't become a much better offensive player a year from now. And when you're talking about two-way players, he got up to 9.8. He was nearly at the 10-point per game average, which is pretty solid for him.
Yep.
If he can get into the 12, 13-point range, then you're talking a major uptick, and that makes your offense much, much better.
And I think to what Joe's point about his versatility, it's funny to think back that when he was coming out of college, I think a lot of people thought, regardless of his size, that he was really more of like a power forward type player, even center coming out of college, because he wasn't really known for his offensive ability. So it's been a credit to him that he's been able to basically be the starting two guard the last couple of years on a regular basis.
I go back to the conversation I had doing a Pelicans podcast, actually, with the voice of the Alabama Crimson Tide, Chris Stewart. And this was right when Herb was really starting to emerge. And I mean, you go back to what he was doing last year at the beginning of the year, he was shooting almost 40% from three, and he was an 80% free throw shooter. And I asked Chris Stewart, I said, would you have ever imagined if I would have said 2 months into the season, into his first year as a pro, that Herb Jones would be shooting 40% from three and 80% from the free throw line? The response is one I'll never forget. He goes, Graff, not only would I have said no, but hell no. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, you talked about how you know what you're getting with Herb, and you sort of you know what to expect. He is consistent. So going into this offseason, I guess I wanted to ask you, what do you want to see grow from Herb, or what do you want to see added to his game? But I guess it's almost more of the same. Slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, you want to see him develop a mid range. I mean, that's just, to me, that's not really what
it's nitpicky at this point.
It is nitpicky. I mean, keep doing what you're doing defensively, which is pretty darn good, because you've got the respect of your peers, you've got the respect of your teammates and your coaching staff on the defensive side, and just keep doing what you're doing, shooting the basketball, stay on those corners, slash to the bucket, and he'll get points.
Yeah, I think his value on offense is always going to be kind of looking around and seeing what they need. They need slashing, they need corner 3-point shooting on a night-to-night basis. It's going to depend. He's not going to be the guy that you say, okay, you need to get us 25 points, but it was nice to see this season that he's
capable
35.
of it. Yes. Right.
And one quick note I'll add to what you said about speaking to Alabama broadcaster and Crimson Tide. Herb, first 3 seasons in college, made 7, 6, and 1 3-pointers.
In the entire season.
In the entire season. His senior year, he made 20. So he made a total of 34 in his 4 years at Alabama. So, I mean, deeper 3-point line in the NBA. You can tell the work that he's put in. He shot 29% from 3 in college, and he's been much better than that in the NBA.
Yeah, I think
Gotta
it was
put
CJ.
the work in.
Wasn't it CJ that was saying, like, man, you got to stop jacking up so many shots in practice. Like, you're taking too many shots.
Yeah.
And it apparently worked out.
Yep.
So, you know what you're going to get from Herb, and we just hope to see more of the same. Graff. Bummer not to hear you on the radio anymore right now, but we're just glad to see you in the building and to have an offseason back in the lab.
Yes, back in the lab. I know those guys are going to be some of them are going to be in and out across the street and doing what they need to do to get better for next year. But I know Summer League is going to be big for some players, and that's going to be really the next kind of storyline after the draft, of course. Mm-hmm. And then we'll get to Summer League, and then, October will be here before you know it.
Yeah, back at it. So we will retool and begin anew. Graff, great as always. Thanks for joining us on the Pelicans Podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Big thanks to Mr. Todd Graffagnini. Always a delight to have him actually in studio here. Big thanks, of course, to Mr. Jim Eichenhofer, as always, for guiding me through the day. And big thanks to you for listening to the Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek. Give me a follow on Twitter at JCar504. Of course, follow Jim at Jim_Eichenhofer. Next week, this will continue. We will have 5 more of these player profiles. Going to have Trey Murphy, Jose Alvarado, Larry Nance, Dyson Daniels, and Naji Marshall. You're not going to want to miss it. Fun guests, fun breakdowns as we sort of try to roll into this offseason and reflect. So thanks for joining us. We will talk to you once again on Monday. And until then, go Pelicans!
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek.